Visions, the day of the Lord. Amos chapter 7 through 9 is sort of a heavy but hopeful ending because Amos's vision is God saying that destruction is imminent, but there's also restoration following it. But before restoration, something harsh has to happen. Through chapters 1 through 6, Amos has been making the case for why a destructive force sent by God is going to come. The world needs to rebuild. It needs a new start. No classes, no vacuums of power. But you can't have a new start while holding on to what made the old era so toxic. In chapters 7 through 8, Amos describes the destruction of God. And in chapter 9, he shows what the result of that destruction looks like: restoration. It's like getting a big spanking from a parent. After getting it, you know that you're never going to put gum in your sister's hair again. I really don't know why that example came up. I literally grew up as an only child for the first 14 years of my life. But in Hawaii, we call getting beat lickings, and I got a lot of it. You don't want it, but I can say that there were things I did that I don't plan on doing today because of it. When we grow up or live for a long time with a toxic environment or behaviors, even if we weren't the ones participating in that toxicity, we eventually end up with some of that waste on top of us. And these toxic things come in so many forms: toxic behaviors, toxic practices, toxic traditions, toxic worldviews, a history of violence, toxic nationalism, toxic masculinity, and toxic churches and evangelism. Even when we get out of the environment, if we haven't gone through a processing of shedding off that mess, then that mess stays with us for the rest of our lives. Some neurobiologists have even argued that we have embedded in our genes historical and generational oppressive trauma passed down to us. Some of us have heard the idea of inheriting generational issues like heart disease and such, but to think of mental health and trauma from oppression being passed down to us as well is sort of overwhelming. Considering this, it seems even more important that people heed the word of the prophet. We need to change for the future of the world. But then he starts off chapters 7 through 9 saying that the world, as they knew it, was about to end and there was nothing they could really do about it. So even if the elite did change, the world would still end. Verses 1 and 2 says this: "This is what the Lord God showed me. He was forming locusts at the time the latter growth began to sprout. It was the latter growth after the king's mowings. When they had finished eating the grass of the land, I said, 'O Lord God, forgive, I beg you. How can Jacob stand? He is so small.'" Amos's tone is different in this chapter. He's not rebuking the nation anymore. He's pleading in desperation on their behalf. Each time God shows him a vision, he asks the question, how can Jacob stand? In other words, the world can't take this kind of beating, God. It won't live through it. So by this point of even my own reading, I started to ask, well, why go through the whole process anyway? Why should the prophet keep preaching for the elite to change if the world is going to end regardless? What's the point in trying to do right if it's all going to go up in flames? Amos takes 3 full chapters to answer this question, and it has everything to do with the series of visions in his sermons. Take a look. Vision 1. Amos starts off with a swarm of locusts. When locusts come through a city, they devour all of the crop. Of course, no food means no means of basic survival. This is their economy. It's their livelihood. It's their money. And all of it is going to be gone. The world is losing its resources, and that means it's losing basic foundations for its own survival. The year 2020 is experiencing its own version of locusts this year: murder hornets. Vision 2. A shower of fire. This is what the Lord God showed me. The Lord God was calling for a shower of fire, and it devoured the great deep and was eating up the land. Then I said, "O Lord God, cease, I beg you. How can Jacob stand? He is so small." Verse 6 says this: "The Lord relented concerning this. This also shall not be." Much of the misconception of the fire, in light of the prophets, is that it's strictly destruction. Living in California especially, you see fires all over the place, and it's devastating. I mean, we hurt when we see people's homes destroyed. In fact, there's a fire right now as we speak, and we wonder, why are you letting this happen, God? Interestingly enough, fires in California have been happening for ages, even before we showed up to build cities here. And many of the places that we built homes in were actually frequent fire locations in the past. California has a history of cyclical fires, and fires help to reset the cycle. In the same way, Amos is pleading with God not to cast this kind of punishment on the people, but he's also acknowledging the need to destroy the toxicity. Vision 3, a plumb line. This is what he showed me. The Lord was standing beside a wall built with a plumb line in his hand. And the Lord said to me, Amos, what do you see? And I said, a plumb line. Then the Lord said, see, I am setting a plumb line in the midst of my people of Israel. I will never again pass them by. The high places of Isaac shall be made desolate, and the sanctuaries of Israel shall be laid waste. And I will rise against the house of Jeroboam with the sword. A plumb line is a weight suspended from a string used as a vertical reference line to ensure a structure is centered. As they always find the vertical axis pointing to the center of gravity, they ensure everything is right, justified, and centered. God is asking for a recentering of his people. But before that happens, we need to remove the toxins. Just like our bodies, the heart absorbs toxic things. And when God shows up, God cleans house. And when he is finished with the cleaning, he looks to recalibrate the soul. But why is there a need to recalibrate if all of the world is going to be destroyed still? The thing is, God's fire doesn't destroy all things. God's destruction is more of a resetting of the environment than it is about killing all living things. Just like months after a fire, new seeds are planted from birds and the wind, and those seeds grow into plants which after years grow into trees. The fire creates new, clean soil for new seeds. In the same way, God is demanding a deconstruction of toxic worldviews so that God can reconstruct our view on Jesus. Amos shows us the necessity of living in exile. Exile shows people what it looks like to reconstruct ourselves in light of the messianic promise. And the messianic promise deconstructs the structures of self-centered worldviews. Jesus, as a prophet, came to remove the toxic ways that we see people in the world so that we can reconstruct our worldview in light of him. Again, I ask, why is there a need to recalibrate if all the world is going to be destroyed still? The prophet's answer to this has everything to do with the next generation. The prophetic message recognizes that the next generation that lives beyond the exile is the generation that will plant the new seeds. We need new seeds. We need new life. But we also need to be ready to allow the process of deconstruction to happen. Only then can the new seeds be planted with a recalibrating spirit. So are you ready to let God recalibrate our hearts based off of the messianic vision? If so, then here are my questions for today. They are not challenges, but rather prompts for prayer. What are some of the toxic things in your hearts right now? Are they things that you've been holding on to and have not let go? And if you've been feeling God pressing in on this toxicity even beforehand, is God showing you ways to cast a fire on those toxins? And what does a recalibrating of the soul look like to you? Where is your center? Let's continue to pray for God to show us what it looks like to recalibrate.